What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Wednesday, December 13th, 2017, middle of the weekday, hump day, starting that long, slow glide down to Powwow on a Friday. And we have got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. And a quick little program reminder, our third-hour guest today will be Don Wiskin of Extendivite to talk about his amazing product and the latest news from that as well. And, of course, Claire and I are using that, and it does seem to be making a difference as well. All right, so let's get right on into the news here. Obviously, a lot of people are very disappointed at last night's Alabama election. Doug Jones has been declared the winner. Roy Moore isn't exactly conceding because already there are all these reports of problems, irregularities they're called, saying that it was a very close vote and there seem to be some problems here. And, of course, the corporate media is out there saying, oh, this is an embarrassment for Donald Trump. It's a disaster for Republicans. It's all Bannon's fault. And basically commenting on the fact that Alabama tends to vote GOP, and this is its first Democratic senator since the early 1990s. But as I said before, there are already problems being reported. There are reports about write-in ballots being thrown out. Apparently there was some tampering there. A lot of people are claiming they never received their absentee ballots. And it's going to be impossible to see if anybody else diverted those absentee ballots and filled them out because due to that last-second decision by the Alabama State Supreme Court, the election records, the digital scans of the actual ballots are being destroyed. So, again, another dirty, crooked election, and nobody in government seems to want to do anything about it. And this should be a warning shot to Donald Trump that if his Commission on Election Integrity does not get its act together and start dealing with this problem, he's going to be a single-term president, and he's probably going to lose the Congress next year as well. And, of course, there was a miracle all over Alabama yesterday. The dead are rising from the grave, and apparently 9,210 dead people voted with absentee ballots and early voting. And apparently there were these so-called poll worker representatives going around nursing homes talking to patients who are basically mentally incapable of understanding politics and apparently filling out absentee ballots for them. And there were the usual reports of machine glitches, polling places. There were long lines because the machines weren't working. And Alabama's trying to explain this away by saying, well, it's a whole brand new system, and, this was the shakedown cruise, and there were going to be problems. But Alabama has a long, long history of very questionable elections. And this just appears to be another one of them right now. Apparently, there were allegations of voter suppression. Apparently, people were added to the inactive voter list, even though they voted in the Senate primary. So, the usual skullduggery to the benefit of the Democrats. Oh, and by the way, speaking of the Democrats, according to the official Alabama election statistics, 92% of the Democrats in the state voted. That's unheard of in an off-year election. And people are already saying this can't be right. All right. Now, as you know, Rosenstein is getting his grilling in front of the Congressional Committee, and they're covering a lot of subjects, and Rosenstein is trying to defend all of the investigators, such as Peter Strzok, and saying that, it's normal for these investigators to have their own political opinions. We shouldn't fault them for that. But it doesn't necessarily suggest that they're biased in their investigation. Which is kind of a little bit silly when the entire investigation seems to be biased against Trump. Now, if half of them were biased against Trump and half of them for, then you'd have a case to say that bias is not coming on in there. Now, Rosenstein did confirm there have been no improper orders from the White House. But he also says there's no reason to fire Special Counsel Robert Mueller at this time. Now, as it turns out, surprisingly, it looks like Mueller's investigation is about to wrap up anyway. He's finished interviewing the White House staff, and the word now is the investigation is going to be finished within a few weeks. And earlier it had been expected to go on for many more months. So what it's looking more and more like is, except for those indictments that have already been handed down, which were for activities unconnected to the campaign, Mueller found nothing. Mueller found nothing. Now, one of the real big stinks here that Rosenstein is trying to gloss over is the Department of Justice knew that Mueller had a conflict of interest related to the Russia probe before they even hired him. They issued what was called an ethics waiver, saying, yes, we know that there's a conflict, we're waiving this one, we don't think it's a problem, but on examination, the Justice Department refuses to disclose the details on just how they arrived at this decision that Mueller could have an ethics waiver over this Russia investigation. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network here. Now, federal judge, Washington, D.C., Tanya Chutkan, she's an Obama appointee. She's recused herself from a case involving a dispute over subpoenas issued for the Fusion GPS, the firm that commissioned that dodgy dossier. And apparently, Alexei Gubarev, who's a Russian technology executive accused in the dossier of hacking Democrat computer systems, has sought to subpoena Fusion GPS records and to depose its employees to find out more about the research firm's work on the dossier. Now, Chutkan recused herself last month from another case involving Fusion GPS. So it appears there may be some kind of a conflict of interest, or, as we mentioned the other day, the wife of that Department of Justice official who was demoted and taken off the investigation worked for Fusion GPS and the Central Intelligence Agency, which raised the question that Fusion GPS is, in fact, a CIA front. And maybe that's why the judge is being warned to get off that case. Now, getting on back to Peter Strzok, more and more questions are surfacing over his involvement in using that dodgy Russian dossier to get that FISA warrant to spy on Donald Trump's family. Because that would definitely indicate that crosses a line when you're out there obtaining a warrant using false pretenses. John McCain's role in this phony dossier is starting to be brought up again. Now, he's trying to talk it over and say this is no big deal. He wants this to go away. It's not going to go away because it's come on out that Senator John McCain was at least partially responsible for putting this dossier in the hands of the FBI. And it's a work of fiction. It was paid for by the Democratic National Committee, the Hillary Clinton campaign, and then later on by the FBI itself, and again, that links back to Peter Strzok. And then John McCain got hold of it, took it to the FBI, and when it was made public in BuzzFeed is when everybody else found out about this. Now, FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe has abruptly canceled his closed-door testimony in front of the House Intelligence Committee as news emerged that the wife of senior Department of Justice official Bruce Orr worked for Fusion GPS and CIA. And Orr was demoted last week after allegedly trying to conceal his contacts with Fusion. And all of a sudden, McCabe is saying, I don't want to testify. So it's looking like there's something else going on with Fusion. And again, if they are a CIA front, they're going to be trying to do damage control on this one as hard as they can. Now, Attorney General Jeff Sessions says he's exploring the idea of a special counsel for that demoted Department of Justice official who's tied to Fusion GPS and CIA. He's saying that. Whether it'll actually happen or not remains to be seen. But again, if Fusion GPS is tangled up with CIA, CIA is going to go all over Capitol Hill and say, no, this can't go any further. We don't talk about what the CIA does. We don't talk about the gun running. We don't talk about the drug running. We don't talk about any of that stuff. The public can't know what the CIA has been doing all these years. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start talking about the war zones because there's a lot of stuff going on over there. Trump has declared victory over ISIS in Syria. And this is arrogance on display. First of all, the reason the U.S. went into Syria was not to get ISIS, but to get Assad. And Assad is still there. And they had all that bogus stuff about Assad is gassing his own people, and Assad is tap dancing barefoot on shag carpeting, and Assad passes wind in the elevators, and all this other demonization that we hear every time the U.S. wants to go to war against another country. Then the U.S. rebranded, because the American people were getting sick of this war continuing in Syria, in what appeared to be an act of unbridled aggression. So they rebranded and said, well, we're actually in Syria to get ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And when the U.S. went in after ISIS and Al-Qaeda, they kept missing ISIS and Al-Qaeda and kept hitting important Syrian infrastructure. That's when Syria asked Russia to come on in, and Russia proved to be tremendously effective in getting rid of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And now Trump is trying to take credit for that. And then Trump comes out with another very arrogant statement. He's decided that he is willing to accept Assad staying in power until Syria's next election. Now, of course, given that the original agenda in Syria for the United States was to get rid of Assad, Trump just admitted that the U.S. effort to oust Assad has failed. Now, they may try and do something funny with Syria's elections, or they may just be standing around in Syria just so that they don't have to admit that they lost, even though everybody sees it as having been exactly that. And apparently the United States is still trying to find a way where they will participate in the post-conflict planning of Syria. And the United States is going to maintain their military assets on the ground after Russian forces exit, to ensure that U.S. officials are positioned to influence the post-conflict landscape. This is coming from former CIA officer Philip Giraldi. So even though they lost, they're still going to be in there and try and force their way in and say, yeah, we're going to help decide what the future of Syria will be. Good luck on that one, because nobody in Syria wants the U.S. meddling in their country any longer. They've had 6 years of U.S. meddling, and that's 5 years and 300 days way too long. Paul Craig Roberts is out there saying what we already know. Washington has lost the Syrian war, and by continuing to try and insert itself back into Syria, it may lose it a second time. And they're destroying their own credibility in the process. Now, Netanyahu is out there saying that Iran is thinking about sending 80,000 Shiite fighters into the Middle East, into Syria, to shore up Syrian entrenchment. Well, Syria is not entrenched. Syria is a nation. And what is going on here is, even though Netanyahu and Trump, and before Trump, Obama, messed up Syria, they're figuring out a way to blame Iran for it. No matter what goes wrong, we're going to blame Russia, we're going to blame Iran. And apparently Netanyahu is also still very angry at the EU foreign ministers over their refusal to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. And he's accusing them of pampering the Palestinians. Says the Palestinians need a reality check. Now, apparently the Trump administration is preparing a public display of what it says is evidence that Iran is providing missiles to Houthi rebels in Yemen. And apparently Nikki Haley's going to go on up to the United Nations and present whatever they're going to show. And this is probably going to remind a lot of people of Colin Powell and his little vial of talcum powder that he told everybody was anthrax. Now, the missiles that have actually flown out of Yemen into Saudi Arabia are known to be a Yemen-designed Yemen-built missile. Iran is denying sending them any missiles whatsoever, and there's a certain logistical reality that Iran would have a very tough time getting into Yemen through all the intervening territory with any sizable cargo planes. But apparently this is another attempt to demonize Iran ahead of a new war that they're planning for there. Speaking of Yemen, all the Russian diplomatic staff are leaving Yemen. They're going to try and do their functions in Riyadh, but basically they're saying that the situation in Sana'a is too unstable, and they're feeling that their diplomatic personnel are at risk here. Up in Ukraine, Kiev is claiming environmental damage in Crimea, that the Russians are damaging the Crimean environment, and therefore there have to be even more sanctions against Russia. Well, what about the environmental damage that Poroshenko is doing over in eastern Ukraine with the constant warfare? I think that's very damaging to the environment, so maybe it's time to put sanctions on Ukraine or on Poroshenko. But Poroshenko's got to be getting desperate to use environmentalism to try and push forward more hostilities against Russia. It really is rather silly. Now, the other day we were talking about how Russia and Japan are starting to move closer together militarily, with the first move being a joint search and rescue partnership, so that if something goes missing from either country, both countries will cooperate in trying to locate survivors. Meanwhile, friction is building between Japan and the U.S. because there's been another incident down in Okinawa. Now, the Okinawans want the U.S. out. Been there for a very long time. There's been an ongoing problem with U.S. forces raping Okinawan women and other issues. And apparently, there was a U.S. CH-53E transport helicopter flying over an elementary school on Okinawa, and one of the windows fell out onto the playground. And a 10-year-old boy suffered a minor injury, but it's once again reminded the people of Okinawa that this very heavy military equipment constantly flying overhead is a danger. They're worried about their safety from all these bits and pieces flying off U.S. aircraft. Now, over in Korea, things are getting a little bit confusing here, because yesterday, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said the U.S. is ready to speak with North Korea at any time and without preconditions. Says we can talk about the weather if you want, we can talk whether it's going to be a square table or a round table, whatever. At least let's sit down and see each other face to face. Now, North Korea's been calling for talks all along, but the policy up until now was, from the U.S., talks are pointless. North Korea just does what we tell it to do, or there will be consequences. So a lot of people were very surprised by Rex Tillerson's comment, and North Korea was quick to respond, saying, yes, it's important to avoid war. Our door is open for negotiations. Let's get this thing going. And everybody was saying, ooh, maybe we're going to dodge a bullet there in North Korea. Maybe we're going to back off on that one. Unfortunately, the White House then issued their statement saying that President Trump's policies regarding North Korea have not changed one bit, that North Korea continues to be a threat for everybody in the region. In other words, going on back to this confrontational attitude. Now, Trump right now is standing alone in his recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Maybe Trump thought he was going to be a new Harry Truman and get the world to just go along with what Israel wanted. It didn't work out that way. When we come on back from this commercial break, more on this subject. Aloha America, welcome back to our show. We're going to go ahead and take a phone call now from Kevin in West Virginia. Aloha, Kevin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Mr. Mike. What's on my mind is the Alabama Senate race. What a fraud.
I agree.
Do you agree with that?
I agree with that. I mean we saw, we saw our election systems are rigged. We saw how dirty the campaigns can get last year, and we just saw more of the same down in Alabama. And it begs the question, why isn't Trump's Commission on Election Integrity doing anything? We understand they've documented a lot of cases of election fraud from last year's election season, but so far nobody's actually doing anything. And the Democrats have pulled off another upset. They did it with a smear campaign. They did it with dead voters. We're getting reports that apparently people were bussed in from out of state to vote because, again, no voter ID required, and all sorts of chicanery going on like that.
Yeah, I mean, you called this yesterday. I mean, and I think I called in and spoke to you. You're like by hook or crook, and the whole time you said that yesterday, I was like, yeah, they're gonna steal this. Absolutely, they're gonna steal this. My question is, I know, like you said, from the Voter Integrity, Act law that you're speaking about. Man, this is so overwhelmingly fraudulent that there has to be this has to be contested, right?
Well, you see, it can't be because of the Alabama State Supreme Court staying the lower court order to preserve the election records. And that means all the digital scans of the ballots are being deleted if they're not already gone. And it was when that State Supreme Court came down with that decision that I knew this election was going to be stolen. They didn't want any evidence. There's nothing that Moore can do. There's nothing to go back to. There's no way to do a recount. It's just the ballots went into the machine and some totals came on out. And anybody who watched Hacking Democracy knows how the totals can be fudged. And so, yeah, it was another stolen election. Our election system is completely untrustworthy, and nobody's doing anything about it because most of the people who are in high offices benefit from the fraudulent system, and they don't want that to change.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I was going to get to that with you. Like I had heard these records are digitally being deleted, if not already. And then the other thing I had heard, the military's vote didn't even count.
I haven't heard that one, but that's a surprise. Why doesn't the military vote count?
Well, I have no idea. Apparently they didn't get them, the soldiers that were overseas, and I guess from Alabama that were voting, overseas. They never got their the ballots, never got their vote. I mean, and I find that to be quite interesting. There you go.
Well, I mean, you're right about not getting the ballots, and it's not just the military. Apparently, a lot of people in Alabama registered for absentee voting, and they never got their absentee ballots. But it appears that somebody was using those absentee ballots because there were a lot of absentee ballots filed.
Huh. That's interesting. Hey, there could be more fraud right there that me and you just discovered right there.
Yeah. It's a crooked election. It was so crooked they had to screw those ballots into those ballot boxes.
Well, Mr. Mike, that's all I wanted to talk to you about was I had woke up this morning and seen he won by 0.5 of a vote or 0.5% or whatever it was. And I'm like, that can't be. Everybody I had heard talking on your show and other shows that call in and were from Alabama were like, we're voting Roy Moore. So absolutely this thing is rigged, stolen. And I think this is setting the precedent on what you're going to see in the 2020 presidential election.
I think we're going to see more of it just next year in the midterm elections. The Democrats want that Congress. And, especially coming out of last year, there's not a lot of popular support for the Democratic Party. And so if they can't win it honestly, they're just going to steal it. And last night in Alabama proved it. They're just going to go on doing what they're going to do because nobody is standing up to them and telling them to stop.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, and I'm up here in West Virginia, and right across the road from Maryland. Maryland, same thing, no voter ID. I mean, and they were busting the people in during the Trump election at the voting thing, in Washington County, Maryland, and around Hagerstown. I mean, I watched it. I mean, I should have videotaped it, but shoulda, woulda, coulda. But I mean, here's more proof that this what if our vote doesn't count, if our voice doesn't count. What point is it to be a citizen? What point is it to abide by the laws of this country if nobody's going to listen to us?
I agree. The contract with the American people is broken. We're not being allowed to elect the leaders that we want. We're living in a dictatorship. And having broken that contract, that Constitution, our obligation to that government ends at that point. We're living under tyranny, and they're trying to still pretend that we're a democracy and we've got some control over the government. But Alabama just proved yet again that is not true.
Yep. I mean, and I said it the other day to you, I don't want to see this thing collapse, but it looks like the Soviet-style collapse is coming.
I agree.
I mean,
okay, we got to let you go. We got to take another break for commercials. Thank you very much for the phone call. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and it's time to grab your paper and pencil. And I'm sure most of you have probably written this down already, but for those who have not, if you want to support our work, and we do need your support, the address to send a donation by check or money order is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. And the phone number, if you want to call on in, is area code 800-724-2719, extension 01. So thank you in advance for all your help, because we certainly need it, especially as the nation is not getting any better as far as we can see. All right, getting on back to what's going on with Donald Trump and Jerusalem. Trump is basically standing all alone on this. I mean, Netanyahu's out there saying, yes, this is a good thing, everybody needs to go along, but Trump really is standing alone. Even the U.S. State Department is not changing its view that Tel Aviv is the capital of Israel. And so it looks like this was a totally empty, pointless, symbolic gesture that Trump did that has resulted in this furious backlash across the globe, ended any illusion that the United States was an impartial broker of peace in the Middle East. It's seriously damaged political relations with so many nations, nations that we're dependent on, nations that we need to be friends with. And all to please Netanyahu and AIPAC and Sheldon Adelson. Now, the Islamic Summit has come together, and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation held an extraordinary summit to respond to President Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. And what they came up with is they officially recognize East Jerusalem as the capital of Palestine. And again, there's a significant difference in the approach to the city between Israel and Palestine. Palestine's willing to share. East Jerusalem is supposed to be Palestinian territory under the United Nations partition plan. And they're willing to let Israel have the part of Jerusalem that the United Nations says belongs to Israel for their capital. There's no reason you can't have a single city that's divided down the middle be a capital for both countries. And Palestine's willing to share. Israel is not. They want it all. Now, over in Egypt, their foreign minister, Sameh Shoukry, said before that meeting of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation that Egypt will remain at the forefront in defending historic and legal Palestinian rights. So that's very, very tough talk that's coming on out there. Jordan's king has rejected the change in the status of Jerusalem and its holy sites. Now, over in Malaysia, they're condemning and rejecting the U.S. move to proclaim Jerusalem as the capital city of Israel, calling for it ultimately to be the capital of Palestine. And as we mentioned yesterday, there are tensions all over the place here. And apparently one of the political parties in Malaysia has launched a boycott campaign against Israeli products and enterprises as a form of protest. And they're simply saying nobody will use Israeli products in Malaysia from that point on. Now, I don't know how much Israel exports to Malaysia, but this is going to be another major hit on Israel's economy, along with the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. So, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas commenting on the fact that Washington has lost the illusion of being an honest broker in the Middle East, says it's time for the United Nations to take over and settle the issue between Israel and Palestine. And, of course, I can already see Nikki Haley jumping up and down and screaming, the United Nations is unfair to Israel. They're unfair to Israel. Now, here's a good one. Over in Iran, a member of the Iranian parliament says President Trump has opened a new chapter in the book of obscenity by recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of the Israeli regime. And here's the kicker. This particular representative in the Iranian parliament is Jewish. That's another reminder about this nonsense that Netanyahu is out there saying that Iran is the new Nazi power and they want to exterminate the Jews. There are Jews serving in the government of Iran. And one of them says that this issue of Jerusalem was wrong, was just flat out wrong. Now, Iran's President Rouhani, speaking at that OIC summit, basically said Muslim nations have to set aside their differences for a unified defense of Jerusalem and the Palestinian cause. And Iran is ready to unconditionally cooperate in defending Jerusalem. So Donald Trump has inadvertently united the entire Muslim world against Israel and the United States. It was always a part of the world I wanted to visit. It's on my bucket list. Not anymore. I have a feeling they're not going to like Americans too much for a long, long time. Down in the African Union, senior human rights expert Salah Hamad said Jerusalem is the capital of Palestine and the United States cannot give it to Israel or any other party. And he's absolutely correct. Donald Trump is not master of the world. He doesn't have the authority to give Jerusalem to Israel. Now, Hamas has announced the beginning of the third intifada following Donald Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and Israel responded immediately with airstrikes into Gaza. So the bombs are already flying over this. A lot of dead people. And the blood is on the hands of Donald Trump. We're going to take another phone call here. Steve, aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Steve down, Florida. I'm going to give you my little take on this whole Jerusalem thing is that to infuriate the Palestinians, you understand that Israel cannot steal land during peaceful times. So I think the whole goal is to infuriate that area there in order to have them riots and protest. Therefore, Israel, of course, bring in the tanks, push them back further, seize land, and never give it back. I think this is kind of their goal.
Well, it may be part of the plan that's going on. The problem is that Israel is stealing land in peacetime. Those illegal settlements all over the West Bank. That's basically the theft of the land. And Israel routinely will commandeer Palestinian land supposedly for military purposes. And under international law, when the military purpose is over, they're supposed to give it back to the Palestinians. But instead it's turned over for development. For Israeli companies to develop. And so Israel is stealing the land even in peacetime. But Israel probably wanted to provoke the Palestinians into doing something so that they could go in and start dropping the bombs again, as they are doing right now in Gaza.
We should probably also be looking for some missiles to be going over to the Israelis, as they do that once in a while, shell their own people, their own areas. Nobody ever really gets hit, but shelling their own areas and, of course, placing blame on the Palestinians and, of course, rushing in with the tanks. Like I said, I think this is a little ploy they have. It's easier to steal land in times of conflict than in peacetime. They'll have reason to do these things, and they'll get acceptance for that. I don't accept it.
I question that because they lost the public relations battle on this one. Now, if world leaders had gone along with Trump and said, yeah, it's time to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital, and then the Palestinians rioted, everyone would say, oh, well, the Palestinians are in the wrong here. But pretty much the entire world is saying it's Donald Trump who's in the wrong here. And so every time Israel goes on in and bombs Gaza, the world will condemn it. Israel just doesn't care. They really have no respect for any other country except their own.
Hey, last question for you. I do believe the United States is acting like the bully in the schoolyard. They have been for a long time. I mean, is it possible, will we ever see other countries realizing that they're getting picked off one by one and finally come to the agreement, we can't lick them by ourselves, but let's all get together and collaborate, and let's kick this schoolboy's ass in the schoolyard. I see that's how our country is. It's the bully in the schoolyard. Is it going to happen? Will other countries finally realize that one by one they're getting picked off and they'll unite against the United States? Will that happen?
Well, I'm sure they already realize that's the U.S. agenda, is to pick off these countries one by one. I think they're trying to hold off on this idea of uniting and going to outright war out of fear of the U.S. nuclear arsenal. But at the same time, they're probably also looking at what's going on inside our country and have concluded, as I have, that the nation is actually very weak internally, economically, militarily, and could be facing a Soviet Union-style collapse in the very near future. So they're going to just sit back and basically wait for that to happen. But if that does not happen, then yes, at some point, we're probably going to see a coalition of nations form around China and Russia, who also have nuclear weapons, and they'll say, yeah, it's time to basically slap down this bully.
Would that happen? You think that could happen as an economic war or an outright conventional war type situation? Economic first?
Well, there's already economic war going on all over the planet, led by the U.S. with all these sanctions, and now these other countries are trying to sanction back. And my concern right now is that these Middle Eastern nations are going to unite together and declare an oil embargo against the West. And as I mentioned yesterday, they already have major oil shortages in Britain and Europe because of that Austria oil hub explosion and the closing of one of the North Sea pipelines for repairs. This would be a real good time to do that. But unfortunately, economic wars have a bad habit of turning into real wars. And I think our government really does want a real war with these other countries for a variety of reasons, mostly because they can't rally patriotic support of the American people over what amounts to banking transfers. Economic war doesn't fire the human imagination the way a real war does.
Hey, thanks, Michael. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. The phone lines are open. Getting on back to that OIC summit, basically, Erdogan got up there and said that Trump has basically rewarded Israel for its constant terrorist acts by recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. So it really has turned into an ugly, ugly situation. I don't think this was what Trump thought was going to happen. And by the way, have you noticed on the corporate media, no more reporting about it? Right now, the entire focus here, they're still going over, huzzah, huzzah, the Democrats prevailed in Alabama, mixed in with the tax plan and how it has to get passed real quick. But there's been no more talk about the world reaction to Trump's decision about Jerusalem, because it's all negative. It's all negative. Now, over in Turkey, speaking of Erdogan, do you remember back in 2016, there was a failed coup d'etat against Erdogan's government. And apparently a wealthy ally of Erdogan has placed a bounty on the heads of 2 former U.S. military and intelligence officials as part of what U.S. officials told the Free Beacon is an effort by the Turkish government to threaten and intimidate Americans who they think were working to undermine Erdogan. So the bounties are about $800,000 placed on the heads of former Pentagon official Michael Rubin and former top CIA official Graham Fuller. And Turkey says they were involved in that coup d'etat. And that's a big reason why Turkey is pivoting away from the United States. You don't mess with other people's country without a consequence. Now then, Tillerson, while I admire what he was saying about North Korea. He's back to ranting about Russia, and he's still out there pushing this idea that Russia meddled in last year's election, even though no evidence has surfaced of that at all. And Tillerson has declared it to be hybrid warfare. So they're trying to find a way to convince the United States that we have already been attacked by Russia. See, it's very important when the U.S. starts a war. They need to make it look like the other guy started it first, because Americans aren't comfortable with the idea of being aggressors. So this is basically Tillerson out there saying, well, Russia sort of kind of has already declared war on us because they meddled with the election. And again, zero evidence to support it. This is the updated version of Saddam has nuclear weapons, or Assad is gassing his own people. Now, as you know, Donald Trump signed this $700 billion military budget, but analysts are saying that when you add in other spending that benefits the military, black projects, other ancillary spending that's not actually on the official defense budget, the actual money that is going to be spent on defense is over $1 trillion. It's a huge amount of money to go on out and conquer the world. But again, as I've mentioned before, the United States spends more on the machinery of war than the next 25 nations put together, most of whom are supposed to be our friends. But they spend it so wastefully on weapons that cost huge amounts of money and do not work that it would be folly to assume that simply because we're spending more money makes us invincible. Because it doesn't really. And it's a dangerous idea to think that it does. We saw how well Russia's weapons worked over Syria. We saw how poorly America's weapons worked when Donald Trump sent that cruise missile attack to hit that Syrian airbase, following an unsubstantiated, never proven claim that Assad was gassing his own people again. Now, Trump may have believed that was what was going on because that was what the CIA was saying, but we know the CIA was lying. The CIA is hardly truthful when they talk to politicians. That's part of their job, to lie, to do what CIA thinks is best for the country, because they're out of control. They're running the show, not Donald Trump. We're going to take another break here for commercials, and we're going to come on back with more news. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I have to be very honest, I am getting totally burned out on all this sexual assault allegations. And as I said before, yes, a lot of this stuff really happens. On the other hand, some of these allegations are completely fabricated, as we saw in the case of Roy Moore, for political gain, for revenge, for publicity. Apparently, Selma Hayek, years after it all happened, has now come out claiming that Harvey Weinstein forced her to do a nude lesbian sex scene in a movie that she was in, or he said he would refuse to distribute it. So one of the problems I have are all these women who are claiming these incidents happened years and years and years ago, and they never did anything about it. They never told their friends and family. And then all of a sudden, in the current hysterical climate, everybody's coming forward with hashtag #MeToo and, oh, these horrible things happened to me. Feel sorry for me. Give me my 15 minutes of media fame. And so forth. But unfortunately, it apparently is a very powerful smear tool. And nothing new about that. There's an old story about President Lyndon Johnson when he was earlier on in his political career, was running for office, and put out a story that his opponent was having carnal knowledge of farm animals. And one of his advisors said, you can't say that. You can't actually come out and say it. And Johnson said, yeah, but I can force him to deny it, which is almost as good. So we are hearing that apparently the Democrats, the liberals, are getting ready to mount yet another smear campaign against Donald Trump, this one focusing on allegations of sexual assault. And again, money is changing hands on this. Gloria Allred is getting involved. Now, Bill O'Reilly, who was forced from his previous position at Fox News over sexual abuse allegations, and we're not going to say whether they're true or not, because I don't know. I've never met the man here. But it has transformed him into a crusader on this issue. And apparently, Bill O'Reilly had an appearance on Glenn Beck's radio program. And according to O'Reilly, his team of investigators have uncovered a tape in which a lawyer offers a woman $200,000 to accuse Donald Trump of untoward behavior. And Bill O'Reilly went on to say that they're encouraging this person who has the tape to hand it over to the U.S. attorney because the investigative team believes there are 3 separate crimes on the audio tape, along with getting the lawyer involved disbarred. And O'Reilly said that if necessary, he'll release the tape himself, that he'll go to the U.S. attorney. He doesn't want to do that and put himself into the story. But as a citizen, he feels it's necessary to get this done. And if that was documented, and he's got the tape, that might pull the rug out from all of this nonsense about sexual assault allegations. We're going to take a break for station identification. We'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Let's talk a little bit about the economy. Now, everybody is looking at the cryptocurrencies, and they're skyrocketing, and people are saying, oh, we're all getting rich, and I guess some are. But we're already hearing people come on out and saying they're at the top and now's the time to start profit taking. And I think that may be the trigger for a major drop because, again, there is nothing supporting the value of cryptocurrencies. It is all based on demand. And if people start selling off their bitcoins, there will be a drop in the price. Adding to the confusion, apparently 2 major cryptocurrency exchanges have suffered outages. Cryptocurrency exchange operators Coinbase and Bitfinex have been experiencing technical problems. And at one point yesterday, Coinbase said service unavailable, saying it was down for maintenance, maybe, or maybe it was being hacked. Those Bitcoin exchanges, there's a lot of virtual money in there. Remember the exchange for Bitcoin miners got hit a week ago, and somebody made off with huge amounts of Bitcoins. If they dump them all on the market all at once, that could also cause a major drop. And remember, we also reported yesterday that basically this group of 1,000 people own 40% of all the available Bitcoins. So they're hoarding it, which may indicate manipulation is coming on. So a little bit of problems there. Now, as you know, out in California, they're having these horrific wildfires. They're claiming to be 25% contained, but it's huge amounts of damage. 250,000 acres burned, thousands of structures damaged or destroyed. And the new GOP tax bill will eliminate critical deductions for disaster victims. Talk about bad timing. And apparently the hardest hit of the people in the California fires may not be eligible for the support that they got earlier, where when you had to replace your property and your insurance wouldn't cover it all, you could deduct those losses off of your income taxes, but apparently that's being cut as well. So the only ones getting tax cuts are the wealthy and the corporations, and for everybody else, it's the deductions that are being cut. We talked the other day about how school teachers who use their own money to buy school supplies for their classes, they're not going to be able to deduct that either. This GOP tax bill is a raw deal, no question about it. All right, let's go over and talk about Europe. and specifically about Great Britain. Apparently, the Brexit deal has hit some major potholes. And Theresa May is caught between a rock and a hard place because she's trying to give the European Union what the European Union wants to let Britain go. But her own supporters and people are saying she's already given them too much. Why should there be a divorce payment? Just go. And Nigel Farage is blasting Theresa May for giving in to the demands of the European Union during the Brexit negotiations. And there have been some very harsh words going on. And apparently, Guy Verhofstadt has blasted David Davis for unacceptable remarks that undermine trust between London and Brussels by revealing that Britain's Brexit deal is not legally binding. He says it's more a statement of intent. So apparently, in response, a German member of the European Parliament is saying the current Brexit trade talks could be completely ditched, that everything is off the table, back to square one. And meanwhile, Guy Verhofstadt is raging at Britain, saying, why would you want to leave? Why don't you like your slave chains? Why would you even want to leave? Now, at this point, I think it would be appropriate for Britain to just leave. Throw some gates on the Channel Tunnel and leave. The sticking point is that the European Union is threatening Britain with a trade embargo unless they get this huge divorce payment, which is basically designed to allow the European Union to keep siphoning wealth out of Great Britain to prop up the EU, even after Britain is gone. Now, I remember early on, Donald Trump was talking about enhancing trade between Great Britain and the United States to try and offset that, but I haven't heard anything coming out of the White House about that lately. But obviously Britain does a lot of trade with Europe, and they need to reestablish new trade agreements, and Brussels is saying that Britain cannot negotiate new trade agreements while they're still part of the EU. It's a catch-22. So if Great Britain decides to do a hard Brexit and just go, there is going to be 2-3 months before they can get the trade started back up again. And that's going to be very, very difficult to do, especially in the dead of winter. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, apparently, speaking of the EU, Jean-Claude Juncker is reportedly involved in a criminal investigation about claims that tampering with evidence misled an inquiry into phone tapping. So Juncker is now in trouble as well. That may keep him occupied. Meanwhile, down in Paris, the Parisians are fed up with this migrant situation and the migrant camps, and they're angry about hundreds of migrants sleeping on the streets, basically filling the streets with long lines, waiting for their asylum requests to be processed. And some Parisians are saying they're going to go on a citywide hunger strike if these street camps are not removed, because apparently these migrants are just defecating and urinating right on the ground, and it's flowing out into the streets. There's apparently a state of constant rioting going on over the frustration and rage. So this open borders thing just has not worked out. And I think there's one of two situations that apply. Either the people who were pushing for open borders simply did not think about what the possible negative repercussions were going to be, or they simply did not care that urine in the streets is a small price to pay for the globalist New World Order and the nationless planet. If you look at what's going on in places like Sweden, Europe is already being destroyed. Europe, as we used to know it before all this globalism, has seriously changed. It's very different today. I got an email from somebody talking about how I speak glowingly of Germany from when I worked there. Same thing for Italy. But that was back in the 1980s. And I think, based on what we're seeing in the media, that Germany and Italy that I knew back then doesn't exist any longer. And that is a tremendous loss. And one of the things I don't like about this idea of multiculturalism is there's an implicit demand in there that your own culture be de-emphasized as all these other cultures are brought on in and don't really want to assimilate any longer. Now, up in Denmark, there's a school that has come under serious criticism because normally every year the school will have a Christmas pageant. Now, they don't really do that here in the U.S. because of the separation of church and state, but it used to happen. Some schools had it. Even Charlie Brown Christmas had one. But apparently it's very common in Europe, or certainly in Denmark. But apparently this one primary school decided to cancel their traditional Christmas pageant so that it wouldn't offend students of immigrant backgrounds. And I think this is a good example of what I mean, where multiculturalism implicitly says your own culture has to be de-emphasized. And I think that's completely wrong. I think when immigrants come to this country and they want to bring their own culture with them, that's fine. And nobody's going to say, you know, you can't do your culture in your own home, your own communities. But this idea that the existing indigenous culture has to go away, that's rude. Teddy Roosevelt had the right idea. He said, if you're an immigrant, you want to come to this country, you are welcome. I'm paraphrasing here. But you need to understand, this is the United States of America. It's not the country you came from. We have one language, English. We have our own sets of laws. And that is the country that you're moving into. And through most of the heyday of immigration, Statue of Liberty, Ellis Island, and so forth, that was how immigrants would behave. They'd come to this country. They'd have their own culture and language in their home, but when they were out on the streets, they understood. There were laws of this land that had to be obeyed. That if you wanted to communicate with a lot of people, you would have to learn English, and you'd have to integrate into our culture. But for some reason during this current fury over globalism and nationalism, the attitude seems to be send enough people into another country and turn it back into the country you just left. And my response to that all the time is, well, if the country you just left was all that good, why are you here? So anyway, this school, located in Grested, basically canceled the Christmas pageant and said the reason they did that is because they have students who are not Protestant. And they didn't want to come across that they were preaching to these kids. Now, again, when you have separation of church and state, I would tend to agree with that. But in this case, this appears to be a decision that's made in the name of political correctness. We can't say certain things. Remember when they were trying to tell us, you can't say Merry Christmas because there are people around you who find it offensive. Well, I'm back to saying Merry Christmas this year. And if you're offended, too bad. I don't care. I don't care anymore. You can't have freedom of expression, which includes saying Merry Christmas, without offending somebody. You can't make everybody happy. Why try? Now, do you remember the big stink that they kicked up when the accusation was made that Russia interfered with the Brexit vote? It was Russia's fault that the Brexit vote passed, that Russia had flooded Britain with ads and propaganda to urge the breakup of the European Union, to weaken the EU. And so apparently the Electoral Commission asked Facebook to basically collect together all the information on Russia's meddling in the 2016 referendum. And Facebook said, yeah, and they went in and they looked at the accounts. They found 3 ads 3. 1, 2, 3. Russian Brexit ads. They cost less than $1 in total and reached no more than 200 viewers over a period of 4 days. So, no, Russia did not force the Brexit. Once again, they're being blamed for things they didn't do. Getting on back to Baltimore, and boy, they seem to have some serious problems there with that dead detective. And apparently there was another killing not too long ago, and yes, it was of another witness. And apparently 4 men in Baltimore have been charged in the killing of this witness who was going to testify against one of their associates in an attempted murder trial. And apparently this witness, Melvin Ford, was shot twice in the head at point-blank range in what it looked like was a targeted execution. And apparently they were able to identify the shooters because somebody got very careless with their discussions and they were overheard. It's amazing. Now, the FBI is launching a probe into Planned Parenthood for organ trafficking, which is illegal. And you have to look at what Planned Parenthood has been doing with the aborted fetuses, harvesting the organs and selling them. That's organ trafficking. And Planned Parenthood's defenders are saying, well, remember, a fetus is not really a human being, therefore it's not organ trafficking. And apparently the FBI is taking a slightly different view, one that I agree with. And again, I don't think anybody has a right to say when human life begins, especially when you're talking about late-term abortions where the fetus could actually, theoretically, survive with the adequate medical care. Now, down in Indonesia, they're having an outbreak of diphtheria, and it's apparently very frightening to civilians and government officials. And of course, the response is, "Well, you need a vaccine. We're going to have vaccination here." And apparently, the bacteria that causes diphtheria ravages the human body. It causes a thick covering in the back of the throat, and it's infected hundreds in Indonesia. The disease is spreading quickly, and not only to regions with limited health services, but also to the country's capital, Jakarta. Now, I remember when I was a kid, diphtheria was still a concern here in this country, but it was eradicated. Unfortunately, it's probably going to be brought back with the open borders. We've already seen that in this country. Diseases that had been eradicated by the U.S. health system are being reintroduced by the people coming across the border because they're not going through medical checks. Even back during the heyday of U.S. immigration, there was a health check at Ellis Island, and if you were sick, you were either placed in quarantine until you got well, or you were sent back home. These days, just wide open, not to mention the people who are simply walking across the border from Mexico. We've had cases of bubonic plague show up here, along with HIV, scabies, H1N1. There's been another outbreak of Ebola in Africa. What if somebody walks into the United States carrying the Ebola virus? Now, here's a story. This is about chemotherapy. We've been talking about chemotherapy and radiation treatment for cancer. They're big money makers. And they're not cures. They're treatments. And yes, you can go into remission from the chemotherapy and the radiation, but the cancer always seems to come on back. And apparently there's been a new study that is explaining why. Because what they're discovering is that chemotherapy, in attacking the cancerous tumors, will cause tumor cells to break off, still living tumor cells to break off and circulate in the blood, spreading it to other areas of the body. In other words, the chemotherapy is causing the metastasization of cancer. Now, let's talk a little bit about net neutrality, which it is apparent that's about to go away. And a lot of people are very angry about that because our lives center on the Internet for many of us. Not just radio broadcasters, but people at their work, people running businesses. They need that Internet, and they need a free and open Internet. And everyone presumed, and the policy was up until recently, that the common carrier provisions of the telephone company breakup applied to the Internet. That it basically functions as a public utility, and it ought to be treated as a public utility. But that is about to change. And the FCC is about to give the giant Internet service providers the power to divide the Internet and basically turn it into a commercial content delivery system and sideline everybody else. Now, when we come on back, a little explanation for why this has sailed on through. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And once again, if you want to support Republic Broadcasting, the address is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. Or you can do it over the phone at 800-724-2719, extension 01. Now then, getting on back to the ISPs and the loss of net neutrality. It turns out that the major ISP companies have been very, very generous with our politicians. And there was an article that came on out from TheVerge.com where basically ISPs donated a total of $101 million to current sitting members of Congress. And basically everybody was on the take. Just about everybody in the Senate, everybody in the House of Representatives got their share. Some got more than others. And that was why they basically bought net neutrality out from under us. Okay, I got an email from somebody correcting me on the situation in Alabama. Apparently, ID is required at the polling places. Obviously, that doesn't apply to people who vote absentee ballot. We have a caller on the line here, Curtis in Nevada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, anybody that's watching knows when these long-term propaganda type things are coming. We saw it when they did it with the Black Lives Matter thing, but the problem was with that population, it was successful, but they only had like about 17% of the population to work with. But unfortunately, in this thing with harassment, you've got 50% plus of the population, and half of that is already on board. So what happens is, when you overload the system with all these allegations, you don't need to prove anything. You just have to get that 5 or 10% or maybe 5% at the most of the women that are going to. They're not going to go beyond just the superficial. They're not going to look into it. They're not going to hold judgment. They're going to go by emotion because, unfortunately, that's human nature. We've known that. And that's what they were able to pull off. And so now we have a situation where, one half of the population rules just by, short-term emotion. And they're going to use that. It's going to be a winner for as long as, who knows?
Well, again, part of the problem goes back to the militant feminist movement of the 1990s and continues to today. Not quite as severe, but back in the 1990s, the message going out from the feminist leaders to women were that all men were rapists and all men were abusive and all men were pigs and blah, 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 blah. And so when women today are hearing about somebody sexually assaulted this woman, it's basically confirmation of their existing belief structure. And that's why they'll just sort of go along with it, without question. And again, it has built this system where, unfortunately, these sexual abuse allegations do work, and people aren't being as critical about it as they should. And as I keep saying, some of the allegations are true, no question about it. I saw a lot of it when I worked in Hollywood. But we also know a lot of these allegations are false for political gain or a fleeting moment of fame. extorting hush money, what all else. But you're right. Unfortunately, too many people uncritically accept these allegations.
Well, once again, I hate to keep bringing this point up, but the fault lies every time I hear a man saying, well, I let the little lady handle it. She's in charge of the household. I'm just going to sit back and watch. I mean, when I hear that, I hear a guy says, are you getting married? Do you realize that when you get married, you think it's going to change where you're going to all of a sudden take charge? It's just going to get worse. And 4 or 5 years down the road, it's become acceptable now that she has an out option. That before it used to be a lifetime commitment for both. And that's how you viewed, relations between men and women. But nowadays, if things aren't going well 4 or 5 years down the road, don't be surprised if you find out, because 7 out of 10 divorces filed by women, and she's already got 2 or 3 accounts already set up just in case. See, it's a long-term, short-term, mid-term kind of looking down the road, and if things aren't working out here, she's setting herself up. And you're the one that's going to be paying for everything. You're the one that's going to be responsible for the failure of that marriage, and the men in general are going to be responsible for the failure in this country and Western society. And that's history. That's what's going to happen. And all these idiots that think that they're doing the right thing by letting it happen, the men are going to be ultimately responsible.
Well, I'm not sure that I would go as far as to say the men are responsible. I think by virtue of the fact that they're accepting these allegations uncritically, women bear part of the responsibility as well. Anyway, listen, Curtis, I'm going to have to let you go. We got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to go ahead and take a phone call from Tom in Florida. Aloha, Tom. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, good day, Michael. Yeah, Michael, what is on my mind is what happened last night with this election with Moore and this guy Jones, Joneson. Yeah, Michael, I was watching the news now, and 95% of the Afro-Americans or Negroes voted for Jones. Now, if that's not racism, I don't know what is. And then you got this Charles Barkley, whatever that moron is, talking about rednecks. Well, you know what? When you got 95% of a group of the Negroes voting for Jones, I think Moore's going to 95% of the white Caucasians are not voting for Moore. Well, who's going to win the election, basically? I mean, you talk about racism here? Let's look at the racism here with that election.
Well, it's not necessarily racist in terms of the individual voters, but there's no question that the Democratic Party has increasingly pandered to the black voters, which is kind of amazing when you consider the early history of the Democratic Party and how they supported racist policies. But the Democrats play that victim card, whether it's racial victims, black people, women, so forth and so on. And unfortunately, it is proving to be very, very effective because times are very hard in this country. And a lot of people just aren't making it. A lot of people, despite going to college and hard work, they don't achieve their ambitions. They're confronted with a potential sense of failure. And they don't want to have to do that. And so they look for somebody to blame. And here come the Democrats say, well, you can blame the white people for your misery. You can blame the males for your misery. You can blame the straight people for your misery. And they build, unfortunately, a constituency based on that kind of thinking.
Well, Michael, you're absolutely right. Now, I totally agree with everything you're saying. But, Michael, let's go back to what you just said a minute ago. These Afro-Americans had such a hatred for the white males, it seems to me, because it all goes back to slavery. It's all back about before the Civil War and how they were enslaved. But, Michael, what they don't ever want to talk about in these history books and all these colleges and high schools and junior high schools is that the two biggest slave owners in this country in 1865 were Afro-American, black, Negro slave owners that owned black, Negro slaves.
And over in Africa, it was other blacks who captured these people and sold them into slavery. And white people are getting the blame for it. History doesn't teach that the first slaves in this country were themselves white. During the height of the antebellum plantation period, the total number of slave owners was only 1.5% of the population. But Antifa and Black Lives Matter and the Democrat candidates are out there saying, well, you know, all white people are descended from slave owners and all the blacks are descended from slaves, neither statement of which is absolutely accurate because a lot of black people have come to this country since the end of the Civil War. And in many cases, especially people in the northern states, are not descended from slave owners. In fact, my ancestors ran a station on the Underground Railroad. So, but people aren't interested in the facts and history. They just want a reason to feel that they are not responsible for their own shortcomings and failings, and that's what the Democratic Party tends to sell.
Michael, you're absolutely right. I got to tell you something that's very important so your audience can understand this. I work with a couple of Haitian male guys that are my friends, and they tell me when they go to Haiti, 80-90% of the Haitians in Haiti want to come to South Florida, Miami, Fort Lauderdale area, Palm Beach, because they think they're going to all get food stamps and welfare and Section 8 housing. And they'd rather live over here than do in Haiti. Haiti's a disaster. And Bill Clinton and Hillary were ripping money off left and right after an earthquake. But you never hear about that. You talk about they talk about uranium one and Russian. What about the money they were ripping off? Matter of fact, 60% of the Haitians in the last election voted for Trump in South Florida because of Hillary and Bill Clinton stealing the money. And
yes.
You talking about slavery? My goodness, they still have slavery in Africa today, Michael. There's so much slavery going on in Africa, it's insanity. You see what's going on with Mugabe and all that. I mean, they can't run nothing. They run it right into the ground. And another thing I always reiterate with you is if you ever read Lincoln's papers 2 weeks before he got assassinated, when he wanted to do after the Civil War had ended, he was wanting to send them all back to Liberia, Monrovia. And none of these black leaders want to talk about that today, like these imbeciles they have in Congress, like that Aiea Hastings, who, by the way, owes he's paid $200,000 out. He should be stepping down like Conyers and Connors and Franken. This guy at Hastings, he's a bigger pervert than all of them. And, you know, Michael, they don't ever want to talk about the real history of this country. Look at what they're going to do with Andrew Jackson's statue in New Orleans. If it weren't for Andrew Jackson, we wouldn't be having a country, we wouldn't be talking right now. But here they want to take his stats down and diminish this president, who's one of the greatest, if not the greatest president we ever had. Old Hickory, they called him, I believe. That was his nickname, correct, Michael? Old Hickory?
I think, yes.
Andrew Jackson?
Yep.
They would call him Old Hickory because he walked right like as strong as a hickory stick, and he wouldn't take no crap. And, you know, but what's going on with these lying institutions, of these colleges and high schools, and now they're putting that guy Colin Kaepernick up on the pedestal like he's the greatest thing since peanut butter. This is unbelievable what's happening in this country. And
well,
about the election last night,
the one I think really shows how ridiculous this is they took down a statue of a Confederate officer in Lafayette Park across the street from the White House, and they put up a statue to former Washington, D.C. Mayor Marion Barry, you know, who was caught, you know, smoking crack on video. And we're going to hold this up as an ideal for our kids to look up to? I really don't think so. By the way, speaking of Haiti, interesting little story here involving Dr. Dean Lorick. And this was a surgeon to the stars, very successful. He went down to Haiti after the earthquake to try and help on out. And he was basically calling out all the fraud of the Clinton Foundation, where they were taking in all this money and it wasn't getting down to the people who really needed it. Apparently he was found dead in his New York home, a knife in the chest, immediately declared a suicide.
Unbelievable. Mike, one more thing. I know you got to go. Michael, what I'm talking about, what's going on with this election last night, you got Barkley and all this. This is unbelievable. You know, this guy Barkley, he's another clown that, you know, that they perpetrate. They roll him out there to get the blacks fired up. And, yeah, you know what? Jones got the blacks when he won, I suppose. I don't know. I guess it's still being contested. But, you know, what are the Democrats doing for the Afro-Americans? Look at Detroit. Look at Chicago. Look at L.A. What have the Democrat party done for the Afro-Americans?
They haven't done anything. They just they just allow their voters to feel comfortable with their present life. That's what the Democrats are selling. And
well,
that's what they're building.
Michael?
You know, the Democrats are offering up just this range of targets to blame because your life isn't what you thought it ought to be. We've got generations of people growing up watching TV and projecting, imagining they are the people they see in the TV shows. But real life isn't a TV show. And so a lot of people are very frustrated and they feel like they're failing to be what they thought they were supposed to be, and they want somebody to blame for it. And so the women are blaming the men, the gays are blaming the straights, the blacks are blaming the whites, and politicians love that because it gives them a built-in constituency where they can get up to make a speech and say, you're right, your life is terrible, but it's not your fault. It's the fault of my opponent in this upcoming election, and if you vote for me, I will undo the damage. It never actually happens because they want to keep people in that state of frustration and anger over their lives to use election after election after election after election.
Yeah, Michael, can you imagine if Roy Moore would have ran an ad with Danny Williams, Bill Clinton's son, saying that Bill Clinton never paid that young man child support? And if Moore would have been smart in the Republican Party, they would run an ad about Bill Clinton not supporting his son. He has 4 kids now. This Danny Williams Clinton, he never got child support out of Bill Clinton, and Hillary Clinton was stopping that. Can you imagine if the Republicans would run an ad like that about Danny Williams Clinton and the blacks love Clinton so much, but here in the meantime, he don't want to pay his black son child support? Who's got supposedly, 4 grandkids this guy got? I don't even have to check it out, but that's what I heard.
Unfortunately, I don't think it would have made any difference. That wouldn't have made a difference.
What? Because the blacks wouldn't even voted then.
Tom, let me get a comment in here. Okay, it wouldn't have mattered what Moore did because the election was stolen. I mean, starting with the sexual allegations, which turned out to be fiction, he was ahead in the polls. He was ahead in the polls up until one day before the election when Fox News came on out and said all of a sudden Jones had a 10-point lead. And people were saying, that can't be. It's got to be a fake poll.
What a racket.
And that was telegraphing the fact they were going to steal the election. So it doesn't matter what Moore did or did not do because the election was simply stolen from him. And now, of course, the actual voting records are being destroyed or have been destroyed thanks to the Alabama State Supreme Court. And so there's no possibility of a challenge or a recount.
It's amazing. It really is. It's the deep state, Michael, so I thank you for your time.
All right, well, thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go here, and we're going to get to some other stories here. Now then, getting on back to the loss of net neutrality, it turns out, according to an article over in governmentslaves.info, more than 100 million Americans can only get Internet service from companies that have already violated net neutrality. And the issue with net neutrality is it's good in principle, but it wasn't really being enforced. And a lot of companies started biasing their traffic toward their big corporate customers at the expense of the little people. And as I said out here in Hawaii, Spectrum Internet is terrible service. And it's another reason why we should be opposing monopolistic control of the Internet. There used to be laws against monopolies because competition would lower prices and raise quality of products and services. Now we have these huge monopolies who, once they are monopolies, can say, we can charge whatever we want because you can't go anywhere else, and forget about complaining about the service. You're lucky you're getting any service at all. And we pay for 300 megabits per second download speed, and we're only getting about 60. And Spectrum was actually sued by the state of New York for failing to deliver the traffic that they advertise. So let's get on out here and talk about the most damaging hacks of this year, because they were out there. There was the WannaCry crypto worm, and it was ransomware, and it was very, very damaging. Thousands of organizations, including FedEx, Britain's National Health Service, Telecoms, Telefonica, and Megafon, others were affected. And then there was Petya, followed by NotPetya. It's actually surfaced in 2016, but the 2017 version, identified as NotPetya, was used to target organizations in Ukraine, and apparently was propagated through the software update mechanism of the accounting software Medoc. And then there was the Equifax break-in that affected millions of people and exposed their information. All right, let's see. We're going to take another phone call. Chris in St. Petersburg, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, the doctor who you just mentioned, the surgeon, who's the 81st doctor found dead under suspicious circumstances, Dr. Dean Lorick, that Aaron Elizabeth so conscientiously has been reporting on all these doctors since June 2015 having died under suspicious circumstances. And this Dr. Dean Lorick had complained, and you can read Aaron's reportage at healthnutnews.com. He had Dr. Lorick had complained on CNN's website about the deplorable situation that the Clinton fund, what do you call it? The Clinton Foundation. See, I'm not a acolyte of Trump or Clinton or anybody. It's just these doctors are being apparently murdered under very suspicious circumstances. So, on CNN's website, he writes, quote, "We expected many amputations, but we thought we could save limbs that were salvageable, particularly those of children. We recognized that in an underdeveloped country, a limb amputation may be a death sentence. It does not have to be so. We thought our plan was a good one, but we soon learned we were incredibly naive. Disaster management in Haiti was non-existent." And he goes on, but it's interesting that this is the 81st doctor dead under suspicious circumstances. The 79th doctor, Dr. Crespo, was also a professor at Weill Cornell Medical College, as was Dr. Lorick. Dr. Crespo was found dead in a bathroom there. And when it comes to Dr. Lorick, he was found by his 11-year-old daughter.
Yes.
Unfortunately, did not leave a suicide note. You would think that being a surgeon, he would have known to, if he was going to stab himself, do so in the heart rather than in the torso. He had drugs available to him, so he could have just popped pills in order to kill himself.
Yeah, or being a surgeon, he would have slashed his wrists rather than just stab himself in the stomach. In fact, I went out and checked the statistics for suicide, and suicide by stabbing yourself is actually very, very uncommon because of the fact that you're dealing with pain and it will take you a while to die. So the whole thing was very suspicious, and again, as was the case with Vince Foster, rushed to judgment, it's a suicide, but again, under U.S. law and investigative procedure, all unattended deaths are presumed to be homicide until suicide is proven. And there is no proof of suicide in this case. As you said, there was no suicide note. There was no reason for this guy to kill himself. He was at the top of his game, very prestigious individual working at a prestigious hospital. He had celebrities among his various patients and clients, and life was very good. This is not a guy that you think is going to kill themselves. And again, while many of these other doctors who've died suspiciously seem tangled up with this GC Math and Negele's controversy, this one definitely seems tied up with his open criticism of the poor performance of the Clinton Foundation, because they raised a huge amount of money supposedly for Haitian relief, and hardly any of it actually got down to Haiti. And with all this pressure to investigate the Clinton Foundation starting to build, it was only going to be a matter of time before somebody was going to interview this guy and revive the story all over again.
Yes, absolutely. So I encourage you, the audience, to check out healthnutnews.com to stay updated on these doctors who, it seems like one a week or so, are dying under suspicious circumstances.
All right, well, Chris, we're going to...
That's all I have for you.
Well, that's good, because we got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and getting on back to computers and computer issues here. It turns out that a lot of surreptitious activity is going on involving the mining of cryptocurrencies. And we reported earlier on how certain websites were inserting Java code onto your machine so that your machine is being used to mine bitcoins for them. And it may explain why 40% of the existing bitcoins are in the hands of such a small group of people. But apparently security experts are claiming that 4 extremely popular video streaming websites have been secretly loaded with cryptocurrency mining code. And according to AdGuard, the massive mining operation was discovered when ad blocking plugin developer was fine-tuning its ad blockers to catch and block sites that attempt to hijack web surfers' spare CPU cycles for mining. And basically, when they were analyzing the first results, they came across several very popular websites that secretly use the resources of your computers for cryptocurrency mining. And apparently, some of the sites are OpenLoad, Stream and Go, Rapid Video, Online Video Converter. And I remember Online Video Converter, that also has a reputation for planting malware on the machines as well. Meanwhile, a password stealing app with over 1 million downloads was just discovered on the Google Play Store. And apparently there's more than one. The most popular was a gaming app, and the app was initially submitted in March of this year. And it was just a gaming app without any malicious code, so it passed Google's inspection. But apparently, after waiting a while, the malicious actors behind the app updated it with the information stealing capacity. So the cybercrime is out of control. It's really out of control. And to me, that's a good reason to go back to a cash-based existence. Because no cyber criminal can reach into your pocket and take out those coins and paper. Of course, the bankers want to go the other way, and the European Union has just announced new restrictions on the moving of cash. They want it all in the banks. And of course, when it's in the bank's computers, again, it is wide open to being stolen, hacked into. I don't understand why our government doesn't recognize that cybercrime is a clear and present danger to our economy, to our nation, to our people, unless the government, specifically the NSA, are the cyber criminals. And remember, Kaspersky Labs identified the Hacker Collective Equation Group as being part of the NSA. Now, apparently, Donald Trump has ordered NASA to lead a new innovative space exploration program. He wants to send American astronauts back to the moon and eventually Mars. And it sounds really good. I'd like to see it happen. I've talked before about technology incubators. But then I remember Obama made the same statement and nothing ever happened. We're going to take a break now for station identification. We're going to be right back here with Don Wiskin of Extendivite to talk about his wonderful products. So please stay tuned. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3, and our phone lines are still open, 800-313-9443. And I believe we have Don Wiskin on the line. Don, are you there? Okay, apparently not. So let's do a couple of news stories while we're waiting for Don Wiskin to be brought online here. Story coming on.
Hello, Michael.
Oh, there you are. Okay. A little delay there in getting you hooked up there. How you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing really well. They were hiding me.
They were hiding. How dare they? The crust. The effrontery.
It's
anyway,
terrible, isn't it?
We're here to talk about Extendivite, and as I was telling my audience earlier, both Claire and I are using this product, and it does seem to be making a difference. And especially, Claire and I are not exactly young, and so we're having to be much more careful about our health. Again, Extendivite is really good at that because it's all natural, and it's using ingredients that I know from some of my own research into older books on herbal healing have a long history of benefits to the human body. So is there anything new and developing regarding the story of Extendivite?
No, everything is going very well, Michael. People are very happy. Actually, just before the show, I was talking with an 83-year-old lady who, she said, well, I started taking it, but I wasn't sure if it was going to do me any good. And then all of a sudden I started feeling better.
Okay.
And that was just her first bottle, so she wants more. But that makes me feel good because she didn't want to get on the pills and stuff. She had some problems, and I was, really happy to hear that because we have a lot of people in their 80s and 90s taking Extendivite.
One of the things that I find interesting are the number of doctors, Orthodox medical practitioners, who are now taking Extendivite, even though I'm sure they have to realize that this is basically using a product which represents a threat to the profits of the medical industrial complex.
Well, some doctors, they don't really care about the profits to the medical industry. They care about their patients, and those are real doctors. They're not MDs, they're RDs. So one doctor told me I had a call maybe about a month and a half ago from a chelation doctor in the States, and he was ready to jump all over this. He bought a whole bunch for his clients because he knows that, this has been working very, very well. He's seen the results in his patients, and one of his patients was taking it, and he said, well, bring me some information. I need to get a hold of this guy.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the product itself here. I'm sorry, I was distracted momentarily there. So what we have here is basically hawthorn leaf extract, garlic, which is blood purifier. And again, a lot of this stuff has a long history of being beneficial and used to treat human illness. And back then, they wouldn't know how it worked. They just knew through experience that it did. And some of this crossed over into folklore, like garlic is good for keeping vampires away. But people would discover that something had curative properties, and they would sort of mythologize it. Like during the Great Plagues of Europe, they discovered that people who were using silver utensils didn't seem to get sick. And, of course, today we understand about nanosilver and its curative properties against bacteria and viruses. But back then, it was magic. They knew that it worked. They didn't know how it worked. And so it went from there to silver bullets and vampires and stuff. But when you cut through all the mythology and everything, you generally find there's a grain of truth in all of these. And so why don't you give us the list of the rest of the ingredients here?
Well, there is cayenne, garlic, hawthorn, valerian, milk thistle, ginkgo biloba, and bilberry. And all of these herbs synergistically work together to help to clean out the arteries, get the blood flowing, boost your natural immune system, give you more energy. You've heard some of the commercials we have. I mean, people are getting up and doing things and thinking that, surgery was the only way out, and they're doing just fine now. And that makes me feel really good. I've been at this for 18 years now. And nothing makes me feel better than somebody calling up and telling me how good they feel since they've been taking it.
And, of course, because it's all natural, there are no negative side effects. I mean, there's no little package insert printed in very fine type that you need a microscope to read that says, all these horrible things might happen if you take the medication. I find it amazing in this country that people can actually watch these glitzy commercials for these patented synthetic medications on TV and hear the disclaimer at the very end of the adverse effects that can happen, even death, and yet they'll still go to their doctors and say, please give me a prescription for whatever it is that's being advertised. And it's important to remember that the United States is one of only 3 modern industrialized nations that allows the advertising of prescription medicines on TV. And I think that's a really lousy way to do that if you're concerned about the health of the patient, because in theory the doctor does know best. But these days doctors just have patients come on in and say, I saw this on TV and I want this, and the doctor will say, okay, we'll do that. Now, you were talking before about the difference between medical doctors and real doctors. Unfortunately, the way it's set up, I have a friend who's in the medical profession and mentioned that how hospitals, large hospitals, will judge their medical staff is based primarily on how much revenue they generate for the hospital. And so they're incentivizing these medical professionals to get you in the hospital, to get you on treatments, to get you on tests, to generate revenue. And often the patient's best interests are not given a high priority. Now, obviously, for small doctors at small practices, they're not having to deal with that, which is why I think people ought to try and find doctors and small practices for their family doctors. But the system really is becoming corrupt, and because of that, a lot of people are starting to really get very cautious about orthodox medicine. We ran a story the other day that revealed that the reason the annual flu vaccine is so ineffective is because the way it's manufactured actually mutates the flu virus. So when you get the vaccination, you're being vaccinated for the wrong strain of the flu, and that's why when the human flu comes around, you will get sick. Then we have all these other stories about various vaccine adjuvants that are bad for you. And it does seem like the modern Orthodox medical establishment is operating on the same moral level as the traveling Wild West medicine show, where they'll come on in to the middle of town, crank down the stage on the back of the brightly colored wagon, do a little show to attract a crowd, and then the pitch man will come on out and say, you know, out on the far end of the Great Plains, there's a scourge, and it is laying waste to the Native American tribes, and it's heading this way. And unless you buy this bottle of Dr. Mike's Whatsum, you are at risk. And so the people will buy the bottle of pepper oil or whatever actually in there, drink it, go home happy. The pitchman takes the money, skedaddles. And it often seems like we're back in that same kind of situation where there's all this fear-mongering going on about all these diseases and things that are out there. And I think a good example, of course, is back in, I think it was 2009, they had this big scare about a coming flu pandemic that just boosted the sales of Tamiflu. And it was supposed to be this flu virus that was a splice between human, porcine, and avian flu strains, which is why I called it the when pigs fly flu. And as it turned out, it was actually less severe than the normal seasonal flu. So it's all about marketing and selling product and not necessarily the health of the patient. And I do see a growing movement in this country where people are trying to take back control of their own health care and going back to natural treatments and just good nutrition, vitamins, and basically going with things that are found in nature because they're less likely to have negative consequences for us than these synthetic molecules that are invented in laboratories that we've never ever been exposed to.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And, you know, people getting the vaccinations, they're getting thimerosal as the preservative in the vaccinations. And that thimerosal is a form of mercury, and that mercury never leaves your liver. It gets into your liver and it's stuck there, and it slows down the process of your body working to repair damages that's caused. And what the extendovite does, just the garlic alone, has over 70 different sulfur compounds, but 30 of them slowly remove the mercury from the liver, and people start feeling better. We've noticed some people that start taking it, they have very grayish-looking skin, and within a few months, their skin is radiant and looking nice because now their liver is starting to function better as we're slowly getting that mercury and other toxins out of their liver and allowing their liver to clean the blood as it's supposed to do. And also the garlic helps people from getting sick. So, you know, if you've been on, like catching a cold, if you've been on extendovite for 4 or 5 months, the chances of you catching a cold are pretty slim. And if you do catch a cold, you don't get as sick as everybody else. You just get a runny nose and a cough, and it just, you know, it's annoying, but it doesn't cause you to have to go lay down for a couple of days and try and get better. So I haven't had a cold in years. Well, I've had colds, but I haven't been sick with a cold in years.
Well, let me ask you another question here, because recently we ran a story where apparently there is a newly discovered link between aluminum and autism. along with the mercury link, which is already documented. And again, aluminum is used as a vaccine adjuvant in concentrations that are much higher than exposure to aluminum outside the body is defined by the USDA or the FDA, where they say you can't be exposed to this much aluminum. And yet the vaccines contain much more of it. It's being injected directly into patients, and especially with this issue about combining vaccines. Because there are now so many of these recommended vaccinations that the doctor's office will just put 4, 6, even 8 into a single syringe. And so you're getting all those adjuvants at one time that can cause a lot of damage. So is aluminum one of the materials that Extendivite can flush out of your system?
Absolutely. And aluminum is very, very dangerous. I mean, a lot of people are using pots and pans made of aluminum, and then they put some kind of a coating on them, and as you scrape the coating off cooking, you wind up getting aluminum. And aluminum is one of the leading causes of Alzheimer's, and they're also adding it to some municipal water systems to, I don't know what they're putting it in there for, but, you know, people are drinking aluminum, and I think this is, I think we need to really wake up, but I don't know if they, I think what's happening is there's way too many people on the earth, and they're just trying to find a way to lessen the numbers and maybe keep people from drawing their old age pension when they get old.
Well, maybe, although Alzheimer's patients can live a very long time and the cost of their care is excessive. But I think we could take a lesson from Flint, Michigan, where they made decisions regarding their water supply that were based entirely on economic necessity, and really without consideration for the quality of the tap water. And that's become a major scandal all over the United States, where these water systems are deteriorating. We had a story the other day where analysts have taken a look and said that most of America is living with infrastructure that dates all the way back to the 1950s, and it hasn't been updated, it hasn't been maintained, it hasn't been repaired, and so we have toxic water coming out of the taps, we have bridges are collapsing, our roads are full of potholes and cracks, and we really are a failing empire. And unfortunately, when the machinery of government starts to break down like that, those components of the government that are supposed to be looking out for our health, they're not functioning either. And we have seen all these stories about how the FDA and USDA are continually being compromised by corporate interests, as a result of which we do have a lot of dangerous products out there on the market. And that, unfortunately, does include the medical industry. We ran an article just today where a new research study is saying that chemotherapy, when it attacks a tumor in the body, will actually cause live tumor cells to break off and flow in the blood to other parts of the body. In other words, the chemotherapy is leading to the metastasization of cancer. So again, people are getting very, very concerned about the deplorable state of America's medical system. We've got the most expensive care on earth, but it's ranked somewhere like 32nd or 33rd in quality. And all of this goes back to Richard Nixon and the Health Maintenance Organization Act, which turned medical care from being a service into just another profit-making scam. And we've inherited the result of that. So people are going back to the old herbalist cures. They're going back to things that are found in nature, and that, of course, gets us back to Extendivite. So looking at the ingredients, I mean, I recognize a lot of these. Valerian, of course, is a natural tranquilizer. And it's a plant found in nature, and the pharmaceutical companies will actually take this natural plant and they'll change it around a little tiny bit so they can patent it, call it Valium, and sell it at a much higher cost. And again, it underscores the fact the goal here is profit, not necessarily the health of the people. But what do some of these others do? Cayenne, I understand, is a vasodilator that's going to open up the blood vessels and allow the blood to flow. But what do these other ingredients do?
Well, at heartdrop.com, I have frequently asked questions. Well, actually, no. I have the herbal descriptions. And, you know, we know that garlic has been used for thousands of years. It's been prized since the first records of civilization for its uses in treating wounds, infections, tumors, and intestinal parasites. And modern-day scientists in numerous clinical trials have concluded that garlic lowers cholesterol, lowers blood pressure, thins the blood, thus reducing your risk of heart and strokes and heart attacks and strokes, and it fights bacteria like an antibiotic. And hawthorn, well, it's one of the most valuable medicinal herbs used in the treatment of congestive heart failure and circulatory disorders. European studies have shown that this botanical increases blood flow to the heart and brain, protects the heart from irregular heartbeats, enhances the strength of the heart's contractions, and mildly lowers blood pressure. And compounds in hawthorn can help protect the heart against oxygen deprivation, a condition that often leads to angina, a disease marked by intense chest pain. And also in Germany, the German commissionee have approved hawthorn for as a heart tonic, and that it works. And a lot of our information comes from the European study of herbs. So, you know, this product was actually originally made by an old guy who worked in or studied in Germany, natural medicines, came to Canada, and made this product back in 2001 for us. And you know, it's all based on the history of the herbs and how they've worked in the past. And even milk thistle, you know, most people know it as a weed that grows out in your farmer's field, but you know, it has all kinds of antiviral, antioxidant, anti-inflammatory properties. It's also a liver rejuvenator. There are people that take milk thistle pills because if they're going to go out and say drink too much alcohol, the alcohol poisons your liver, and that's how you get impaired. This helps protect the liver from the poisons of alcohol as well. So, you know, it's a very well thought out formula, and you know, it works very, very well. All of these herbs are required. Even the valerian is used mostly to calm you while the other herbs go to work. I know that my mom, before she passed away, she was having a lot of anxiety, and you know, she was 78 when she passed away, but she went to see her doctor, and the doctor sent her to a psychologist, and the psychiatrist, I should say, and he put her on what do you call those, antidepressants.
Oh,
and
boy.
Read on the label. Yeah, and read on the label, it says not to be given to people over 60, but there she was, 77, 78, and one of the side effects is strokes and heart attacks.
Yeah,
She had a stroke.
Those antidepressants are just, they're horrible, and for a variety of reasons. I mean, some people are driven to suicide by them. Anyway, Don, we got to take a short break for commercials, and we'll be back with Don Wiskin and Extendovite, and we're already getting emails in asking questions, so stay tuned. Aloha America, welcome back to our show here. We're talking with Don Wiskin of Extendovite, and I got an email here asking a very simple, reasonable question. What's the shelf life of Extendovite? When you buy a bottle, how long can you store it? I mean, presumably you're going to be taking the pills, and you'll finish the bottle before its X date is up. I have a bottle here, of course. This is from the very first time I started taking Extendovite, so its expiration is actually next month, but I just use this as a prop for the BAM User TV feed. So what's the shelf life? Don, are you there? Okay, we've lost
Hi,
Don.
Button.
Are you there?
I'm here.
Okay. Did you hear what I said?
Yes.
Okay.
And our product actually has a 5-year expiry date on it, but the tincture, I mean, you could bury it and pick it up and it would smell bad, but you could still use it, but because, you know, the alcohol preserves it forever. The capsules has a 5-year date on it as well, and we guarantee that at that 5-year date, it still has between 1.8 to 2% Videxin from the hawthorn still active in it. So it's there's no fillers, there's nothing else in it. It's just herbs, except for the liquid. It has an alcohol base. So people are trying to call me, and Babs isn't here, so I can't take the phone.
Well, would you like to finish up so you can take your phone calls here, because we're almost at the bottom of the half hour? And where do people go to learn more about your product and to place orders?
Well, heartdrop.com, that's HEARTDROP.com. There's a link at What Really Happened. You can order it off our website. Also on our website, we have links to Amazon. Amazon is, this time of the year, you're probably best to go to Amazon because you're going to get the shipping faster. We're right in the middle of the Christmas season, so when I say it could be 5 to 15 business days being mailed from Canada, Amazon is a lot faster. But yeah, heartdrop.com, and everything that you want to know is right there, including our toll-free number.
Let me ask you one more question here before I let you go. Obviously, Claire and I and a lot of other health-conscious people, we do business with these large health food chains like Down to Earth, or GCN, probably not so much Whole Foods now that they've been acquired. But is there anything preventing you from approaching some of these large chains to distribute here in the United States of America, so we could just walk in off the street and buy the product?
Well, I have a bunch of health food stores in Canada, but in the States, what happens is you're sometimes best to go to some distribution company that's already dealing with all of these health food stores, because some of them say, well, you know, I'd like to deal with, you know, ABC company because it all comes on one bill. We've approached a lot of stores, and, you know, we're just not getting any real headway. But what I've decided to come up with is we have customer list, and we have customers all over the U.S. So pick the area where we have the most customers, try and get a local health food store to start with it, and, you know, start directing people towards that health food store. That's about the only way we're going to do it. But right now, Amazon and heartdrop.com is one of the basic ways that most people get it. And, you know, they just call and talk with Babs or myself, and everybody's happy.
All right, and once again, that's heartdrop.com, and the product is Extendivite. They've been a supporter of Republic Broadcasting and What Really Happened for a very long time, for which we are very grateful. And it is a good product, and like I said, Claire and I both use it, and it does seem to be helping us deal with the fact that we're not young anymore. We're getting old, and we have old people issues to deal with. But Don, once again, thank you for spending some time with us. And we'll have you back again in the very, very near future, because it is a good product. And if there's one thing I like to do as a radio host and a blogger is actually advertise a product I can truly get behind and believe in, and this is definitely one of those.
I appreciate that, Michael, and I've been taking it myself for the last 18 years that I've been in business, and I swear by it. I don't miss a day, and it's all because it just makes me feel good. All
right. Well, that's a good recommendation right there. And thank you very much. We're going to let you go here. We're coming up on another commercial break. And when we come on back, we're going to be dealing with some economic news, some other little bits and pieces left over from the talking points. Meanwhile, the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, and I urge you to call on in and help fill in the last half hour of our program today. Meanwhile, getting on down to human-caused global warming. One of the mainstays of the global warming propaganda was this claim that Greenland was going to lose all of their snow and ice in 20 years. This was made by one of the founders of Greenpeace going on 19 years ago. And he got called on it and ultimately admitted on TV that, yeah, they were just making these catastrophic predictions to scare people into supporting their agenda. Little dose of reality after we come back from these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about human-caused global warming. And as I mentioned before the break, one of the mainstays of the global warming hysteria was the claim made by one of the founders of Greenpeace that Greenland was going to lose all of its snow and ice in just 20 years. That was 19 years ago. And, of course, Greenland does still have its snow and ice. And this individual was basically cornered during a TV interview about the prediction and basically came on out and said, well, we have to say these extreme things so people will be basically more willing to support the agenda. In other words, it's scare tactics. The world is coming to an end. You are to blame, and we offer to sell you a solution. The reality is that Greenland temperatures have been declining for a century. And that's the reality. Now, over in Great Britain, they're heading into another brutal winter, and it's complicated by the fact that one of the North Sea oil pipelines has had to be shut down for repairs, and oil and gas prices are already going up. Now, remember, the British government has been pushing the idea of 100% renewable energy. There's only one problem with that, and it's actually being illustrated right now in Great Britain, because it's heavily overcast over much of the country, and there's very little wind, which means the wind and solar power has collapsed. Right now, after all that investment, wind and solar are producing only 3% of Britain's energy. And that shows how short-sighted some of this green energy thinking was. The idea that this was all going to work because the sun was always going to shine and the wind was always going to blow. Where all of these systems are breaking down is the large-scale storage of energy still has not been achieved. And we actually have a wind farm here on Oahu, and when the wind is blowing too hard, they actually have to shut it down for apparently some structural deficiencies. But even when it's blowing, if it's producing more electricity than the island needs, there's no place to put it. So that when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing, you have to go back to the more conventional forms of power. Now then, let's go ahead and take ourselves a phone call. We're going to talk to Joe in Rhode Island. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How are you, Mike?
I'm fine.
Mike, yes. Do you, I know that you're from Hawaii, you say?
I'm in Hawaii. I'm originally from New Hampshire.
I see. Have you ever heard of anything called the the Polynesian Triangle?
Yeah, I've heard of it in connection with the Bermuda Triangle, where supposedly there are these regions around the world's oceans where there are mysterious disappearances. And I know that there have been a lot of spectacular cases in the Bermuda Triangle, but sometimes people tend to focus on an area as unlucky, and there are dangerous areas of the ocean. But looking at a map of shipping disasters, you find they're actually much more evenly distributed than you might want to think. Why do you ask?
Well, in my studies over the years, it brought me to the Polynesian Triangle and the sacred tablets that the chieftains, the 32 chieftains of that area.
Okay. That's a different context than I was thinking.
Yes. Maybe someday we can get into depth on that one. But I just did have a couple other quick questions for you, Mike. Just that maybe you could confirm this for me. The border of Alaska, is there a Russian installation, and what is it there for?
To the best of my knowledge, there are no current Russian installations. Obviously, Russia at one point owned Alaska, and some of the remains are still there. We actually have the remains of a Russian fort over on the island of Kauai. It's pretty much deteriorated, but I don't think Russia has an installation in Alaska at this particular moment.
Okay, and one other thing, Syria, is there a negotiated peace that's in place now, or is this still a foundation of peace that starts 14 feet off the ground?
There is no formal peace agreement. Supposedly there's going to be a meeting between Assad and the heads of the legitimate real opposition groups as opposed to the ones that were manufactured to try and get Assad out of power. And Assad has indicated a willingness to bring them into the Syrian government. So that's the status of that. But effectively, ISIS and Al-Qaeda have been driven out of Syria and, for that matter, Iraq. And so there really is no more war there. I mean, there's some skirmishes that are going on and some near misses between the Russian and American aircraft, but that's about it.
So it's not really an official declaration of peace.
Well, I don't know how official it gets. I mean, you have people like Putin saying that basically the war is over. And I tend to agree. Now, if the U.S. is going to try and restart it again, that's another open issue, because as I reported earlier in the show, the U.S. is trying to basically force their way into the discussions of what Syria is going to be following this war. And, of course, Syria's government does not want them there.
Okay, Mike, I'll let somebody else call in. Thanks a lot for your information.
All right, thanks an awful lot here, and we're going to switch over to Sherry in Texas. Aloha, Sherry. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you, Mike. The bits and pieces here, too. Sexual allegations. This is a free-for-all. And it's so funny. I mean, it's sad, but it's funny. But I listen to corporate radios, you know, the AM shows in the morning on corporate radio, the networks, ABC, you know, CBS and stuff. And it's like all they can talk about. It's like they're on the outside looking in, and so nothing is safe to talk about without losing their audience. You know, if you say anything that's going to offend Trump supporters, they kind of lose all their callers, and they wind up having friends and people in politics that, if they can, to kind of come in and be a caller for them, so they'll have something to banter with. And so they're kind of, you know, this is giving them a wonderful opportunity. It suits the agenda for people to talk about other things besides what's important, because they're on the outside. Now, Sandusky, I heard, is going to be trying for a new trial. Did you hear about that?
Yes, we actually had...
trying to garner support?
Yeah, we had a guest on the show or just earlier this week who basically is written a couple of books about the Sandusky case and about false memory syndrome, and says, yeah, there is a basis for a new trial because the entire case against Sandusky was people heard something that they jumped to a conclusion. There were no eyewitnesses accounts, and apparently the supposed victims were browbeaten into making these allegations. And again, nothing new there. We saw it all with the McMartin preschool. And you're right, it's another free-for-all. And the corporate media loves it because they have been losing their audience over their bad reporting. And now they've got something that's sexy and titillating, and people are going to tune on in and to wag their finger at these sexual abusers, or some of them are probably daydreaming and wishing that they had the kind of power and money it takes to be able to do that stuff themselves. So, yeah, it's working for the corporate media, and as you mentioned, corporate media's job is to keep us focused on, you know, the sexy stories, so we're not paying attention to the really important stuff. Two good examples from the past that I can mention, of course, was back in early 2001, the U.S. government was already informing other nations of a plan to invade Afghanistan in October of that year. And it was carried in BBC and Jane's Defense and all these other newspapers all around the world. Here in the United States, all we got was Gary Condit and Chandra Levy. You know, were they having an affair? Did he kill her? And that's why I call the process being conditized. And then again, when we had the Whitewater investigation, which was really getting dangerously close to that CIA gun and drug running out of Arkansas, they diverted and they went on over to Monica Lewinsky in her stained blue dress. And that's what they dangled in front of the American people, so they weren't thinking about the horrible specter of government-sanctioned drug smuggling into this country being sold to our kids.
Yeah. Well, you know, I have to apologize. First of all, I couldn't remember where I heard the Sandusky thing. Okay. Because there's two other stations I listen to on a regular basis. And so, yeah, I can't say I agree with this false memory thing, because I had some abuse as a child. And I do remember, and you do remember certain things. And, you know, you can't just write it off as false memory, I have to say. And that's all I'm going to say about that.
Well, that's why I made the point of lost memories, not repressed memories, but memories that just get lost.
Yes.
But I'm in agreement with you that there are traumas that can basically erase themselves from your mind. And I'll give you one really good example. Claire and I went through the big Northridge earthquake. And we were very close to the epicenter. We lost about half of everything we had, including 2 very large graphics workstations, because I was running an animation business out of our home. And these were silicon graphics, big machines, not normally found in homes. And I remember vividly being awakened by the start of the quake, and you're just dealing with all the shaking and everything. And then my next memory is after the sun had come up, because the quake hit in the very early hours of the morning. The next memory I have is it's daylight, we're picking up the debris, we're trying to put the house back together. And Claire has told me that, you know, I got her out of our apartment building, and then I and some other people went back on in to make sure there weren't any trapped people. And I don't remember any of that.
Yeah.
And
I understand that because I have a similar incident too.
Yeah,
it can happen. It can happen both ways and for different reasons. And also, well, I won't go into that. I won't go into out-of-body stuff because you can be out of your body before an impact, like if you're falling from a plane or in
it didn't work for me when I had a bad impact as a child here. Anyway, listen, we're running out of time, Sherry.
Anyway, there's 2 other things, but I'll save them for another time.
Yeah, because we're running out of time, and I got a couple more callers and a couple more news things that I want to get to. So let's go to Al in Canada. Aloha, Al. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. You were talking about renewable energy, as they call it. You forgot to mention these solar salt. Solar salt reactors that actually concentrate. Well, some of them, they use the parabolic mirrors to concentrate the sun into like a focal point in the center where it heats. It's basically heating salt and turning it into a liquid so that it can, once again, heat water, turn turbines, blah blah blah.
Yes.
The same old, right?
Yeah, but that's still subject to the same problem as solar panels. If the sky is overcast, it doesn't work.
No, you're absolutely right. Obviously, they use these. They're best used in a desert environment where the state you live in. This is no good. I mean, it's too big. It's a tough one. I'm wondering if did you ever see or hear that video of Tesla? Elon Musk is now putting out transport trucks, and it's Loblaws jumped right on it. They've ordered like a fleet of these things.
Okay.
When they're going to be ready in a couple of years. I don't know whether you're up on them.
Yeah, I'm up on that, and I think electric cars are a coming thing, especially now that in the concept car sense, there are now electric supercars that have the kind of performance gasoline cars have and some drivers want to buy. The problem is, again, where does that electricity come from that charges these electric vehicles? And so far, it's still primarily coming from petroleum-fired generating plants or nuclear reactors. The sad reality here in the United States is all of the available hydraulic generating capacity, dams, they've already been exploited. There are no more that we can build more hydroelectric dams across. So that basically has hit the plateau, and we can't get any more out of that particular resource. What I really think people ought to be working on is more directed toward fusion reaction research and finding a new way to generate electricity that doesn't depend on the sun being out and the wind blowing, but doesn't have the downside of fission reactors. The problem is that fission reactors, uranium fission reactors, have been emphasized in this country because you can get bomb stuff out of them, which is why this country is trailing behind the rest of the world in thorium cycle reactors. But even thorium cycle reactors, I think, are less desirable than fusion reactors. And I know the Chinese and the Russians have achieved break-even with hot fusion reactors. And I understand that researchers are still looking into the phenomenon that was called cold fusion, even though they're starting to think it isn't really fusion, there's something else going on, but there is something else that's going on that yields more energy coming out of these little cells than is going on in. Again, we've seen how politics dominates research and commerce in this country, and there may be technologies out there that should be investigated, but if they are a commercial threat to the existing established order, they'll be discouraged, and there won't be any funding for it. A good example, of course, is during the global warming hysteria. Plenty of money for scientists claiming to prove human-caused global warming, and no funding at all for scientists saying that it should be re-examined.
Yep. You know, in Ontario, half of Ontario Hydro 1 was sold to a private corporation, and now I talked to a bunch of people. It's harder to get a permit to put up solar panels. What an amazing coincidence, eh?
Well, we went through that here with Hawaiian Electric. I mean, when the push for solar first started, everybody was getting solar. There was a tax break. And then all of a sudden, the Hawaiian Electric company said, we're losing money here because people are going solar. And then all of a sudden, it got really hard to get a permit to add solar to an existing structure. And a lot of people who'd gone into the business of installing solar panels were simply driven out of business. And so that's another good example about how the existing established companies will stifle innovation and development.
Well, we're getting some crosstalk here, Mike. Mike, I know you have another caller. I'm gonna let you go. I'm gonna listen. Thanks a lot for your time.
All right. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with another call and the end of our show. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program today. We're going to go back to the phones here. Kathleen in Paris, thank you for waiting so patiently. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. I was going to talk about the Zionists and the selling of what I call the Holocaust hoax, how it's been perpetrated on the whole world about. First of all, does it matter what Trump says about where's the capital of Israel? If in fact Israel was stolen from the Palestinians, I mean, who is this Balfour guy that thought he had the right to give Palestine's land to the Zionists?
Well,
is that legal? Is anybody fighting the legality of that?
Well, unfortunately, basically, yeah, it's illegal. Now, as far as Balfour, at the time, Palestine was a British protectorate from which Balfour said, I have the right to make this promise. Now, Balfour did not actually give Israel part of Palestine. He simply declared it would be a good idea and something to be worked for. But Israel basically acquired the land in Palestine by force of invasion. So war, of course, I think is the ultimate illegality. Now, as far as Donald Trump is concerned, no, he does not have the authority under any law anywhere to give Jerusalem entirely to Israel. The United Nations has declared that Jerusalem is a shared city among the 4 major religions that have holy sites there. And East Jerusalem is supposed to belong to the Palestinians and the Muslims. And Palestine is willing to share. They want East Jerusalem for their capital, and Israel can have their part of Jerusalem as their capital, but Israel wants it all. But Trump's declaration was a big bluff. And apparently they were hoping that the rest of the world would just follow along like they did when Harry Truman recognized the state of Israel on stolen Palestinian land. So that did not work on out. And so it's a completely meaningless, empty, symbolic gesture that was done to make Netanyahu happy, AIPAC happy, Sheldon Adelson happy, and it has basically united the Muslim world in anger against the West, especially the United States of America.
Yeah. I see.
Okay.
I'm still just angry about how the Zionist agenda has taken over even our language. The Holocaust, you can't even speak of the word. I mean, it was, I don't know if it was invented but certainly has been taken over to mean, what happened to the Jewish people during the war. And genocide, you almost can't use this word. in any other context.
Let me make a comment here. Let me make a comment because we're almost out of time here. What happened in World War II, even by the official sanctioned story, was not targeted only on the Jewish people. The Nazis were rounding up anybody that they didn't think met their requirements for race hygiene. Gypsies were in there, gays were in there, the mentally ill, anybody who didn't meet that Aryan idea was put in there. Anyway, we got to let you go, Kathleen. And we're coming up here on the end of our program very, very soon. Yeah, there's the music. There we are. Anyway, stay tuned for John Stedmiller. He's got a lot of interesting information to share with you. And we will be back tomorrow here on Republic Broadcasting. So, aloha, America.